Imagine a polished young woman in her late 20s, smartly dressed, standing trembling before Judge Caprio's bench, trying to justify an unpaid parking ticket with words that sound more like a lawyer's argument than a simple explanation. Her hands gripped the edges of a folder so tightly the corners creased, a subtle sign of nerves belying the confident tone she struggled to maintain. The courtroom was hushed. Soft murmurs faded as the judge cleared his throat and leaned forward on the polished wood of his bench. "Miss?" Judge Caprio's voice was steady, measured, inviting, but firm. "Natalie," she answered, her voice slightly uneasy, yet laced with conviction. "Natalie Carter." Caprio's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, but stayed fixed on her. The name carried weight, a memory from decades earlier, when the Carter name was synonymous with civic pride, hope, and a respect that extended well beyond the city limits. Her father, once mayor, had been a man Caprio admired from the bench and off it, a beacon of integrity in a time when politics often felt like a murky swamp. Natalie swallowed, then unfolded her argument, almost as if reviewing notes for a trial rather than a trivial parking violation. "Your Honor, the ticket alleges a violation during restricted hours. However, the posted signage is misleading, conflicting with municipal parking ordinances established 2 years ago. Furthermore, there is precedent. The case of Benson versus Providence Parking Authority in 2017, where similar signage discrepancies led to ticket annulment. I am requesting the court to dismiss this citation on these grounds." She glanced up briefly, searching the judge's face for some reaction. Caprio folded his hands on the bench, his silver hair catching the courtroom light as he scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Miss Carter," he began quietly, "your argument is detailed, and your citations accurate. But I must ask, is this about the ticket, or something else?" The question hung in the air, soft but penetrating. Natalie's lip twitched, betraying a sudden flash of emotion. "It's about the principle," she said quickly, trying to regain her composure. "My father, he stood for principles. We believed that laws should be just and respected. But this city, these rules, now they seem bent to crush the little guy. My father lost everything because of a legal technicality. He loved this city, and yet he was undone by its own laws." Caprio's eyes sharpened, decades of experience sensing undercurrents no casual observer would detect. "Your father," he said carefully, "was a man I held in high regard. I knew his sense of ethics well." Natalie's glare flickered, mingling pride and pain. "Would he have approved of this tone, Your Honor? The kind of tone I'm forced to take, arguing over a parking ticket as if it's justice itself?" Her voice cracked. All the restraint broke in a sudden breathless confession. "I'm not just defending a violation. I'm trying to defend a legacy, one tarnished by indifference, by silence, and by decisions I believe you could have changed. My father lost because the system failed him, and I'm standing here because I can't let that injustice be forgotten." For a long moment, the judge said nothing. The courtroom's usual rhythm slowed. A quiet gravity settled over those gathered. The clerk's fingers stilled on the docket, the hum of the air conditioning seeming louder in contrast. Other spectators shifted in their seats, sensing the unmistakable shift from mundane to personal. Caprio folded a piece of paper in front of him with deliberate calm, then looked up. His voice held a note of gentle reproach. "I knew the man your father was. I believed then, as I do now, that he was honest, always trying to do right by this city, in his own way." He paused, letting the own weight of his words settle between them. "But honesty alone sometimes isn't enough. The law, it's impartial. It listens to fact, not feeling. And I doubt he would have approved of anyone using his name to cloud judgment or bend outcomes to personal grievance. Natalie's shoulders stiffened, a silent refusal, but there was an unmistakable tremor that softened her stance. "I'm not here to grant special favors," Caprio continued, voice dropping to a near whisper, yet all could hear, "and certainly not because of who your father was. The courtroom is no place for old debts or debts imagined." Her gaze dropped for a fraction of a second before she squared it again. "Because of that, Your Honor," she said, voice barely steady, "I'm here. Because nobody else did what should have been done. My father lost his name, and I refuse to let that be the final word." The judge's eyes narrowed, tracing the sharp line between pride and pain, etched in her expression. This wasn't about a ticket anymore. What sat before him was the daughter of a once great man, not asking for mercy, but wrestling fiercely with the ghosts of a past that still haunted these halls. "Very well, Miss Carter," Caprio said slowly. "Let us see where this path leads." He tapped his pen against the desk, signaling the formal continuation of the hearing, but the air remained thick, charged with the silent history between them. It was clear. What began as a parking dispute was now a reckoning decades in the making. The judge leans back, studying her. His eyes are soft but unyielding, the calm in his voice cutting through the stillness. "Do you think justice owes you something for who your father was?" The courtroom hushes, the walls seeming to close in. Natalie's mouth opens, but no words come. Her breath catches, shallow and uneven, as if the question was an unexpected weight pressing on her chest. She locks eyes briefly with the judge, then looks away, fingers tightening around the edge of the counsel table, white-knuckled. I've been trying to clear his name," she finally says, voice barely above a whisper. "For years, since the scandal broke. Everyone called him corrupt, accused him of stealing public funds. It ruined him." Her eyes flick upward, desperate. "You could have defended him, testified, said something, anything. But you didn't. Why?" Silence stretches long across the courtroom. The jurors, the clerks, even the stenographer seem to hold their breath. Natalie's confession hangs like a stone in the air. Judge Caprio nods slowly, but doesn't answer. Instead, he glances at his watch, then says, "We'll take a brief recess." His tone is neutral, yet there's a quiet gravity beneath it. As murmurs ripple, Natalie steps back, hesitating a moment at the courtroom door before slipping through it. The corridor feels colder, the heavy echo of her footsteps swallowed by fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Near the clerk's desk, she pauses, catching fragments of a low conversation. A woman's voice, cautious and wary. "You heard about the sealed document in the former mayor's case, right? The one Caprio signed off on years ago." Natalie's heart hammers. Sealed? Signed off? What had been kept hidden from her all these years? She moves quickly, a shadow among shadows, until she reaches the public archives at the end of the hall. The door creaks open under her push, revealing rows of metal shelves and filing cabinets beneath a flickering bulb. The smell of old paper and dust presses in. Her hands tremble as they scan labels, searching for any sign of her father's name. Finally, taped to a worn manila envelope in thick, deliberate script, "For Caprio only." Her breath stutters. With trembling fingers, she slits the envelope open. Inside, a folded note, yellowed, edges curled, handwritten in the same distinctive script. She unfolds it slowly, the paper rustling sharp in the silence, feeling like the fragile last link to someone she barely knew. The words inside unravel her certainty. A confession, but not of the crime she expected. Instead, her father pleads with Judge Caprio not to interfere with the case, not to seek justice on his behalf. He accepts the blame willingly, not as guilt, but as protection. For someone else. For the city. For people she'd never imagined. Her chest tightens. Her vision blurs. The steadfast certainty that had supported her crumbles beneath the weight of this betrayal and sacrifice. The distant hum of the building sounds suddenly loud, invasive. Her hand shakes, paper slipping toward the floor. She folds the letter carefully, clutching it to her heart, the cold reality sinking in. Her father's fall wasn't the result of a miscarriage of justice. It was a choice, a burden carried alone. Time seems suspended as she retraces her steps, each footfall a slow pull back to the courtroom's harsh light. Natalie slips into her seat again, pale and silent, the letter pressed beneath her hand. A secret between her and the judge, now poised to unravel even further. The room awaits her next move, but for the first time, she has no words, only questions. Back in court, Caprio studied her pale face with a quiet intensity. "Did you find what you were looking for?" His voice was low, almost gentle, but carried that unmistakable firmness of a man who had seen too much to be fooled. Natalie's eyes flicked to the floor. The letter, folded with care and time-worn edges, pressed between her fingers like a fragile piece of her father's dying confession. Her throat tightened. She couldn't look at him, but the truth throbbed between them, a fragile thread pulling taut. Finally, she set the envelope on his desk with a soft thud and whispered, "You already knew." Caprio nodded slowly. A faint crease appeared between his brows, a shadow of regret folding across his features. The courtroom was hushed, every pair of eyes now fixed on the exchange between the judge and the mayor's daughter. His gaze didn't waver. "I carried that knowledge with me," he said, his voice steady. "The guilt of what happened to your father. More than you know." He paused, the weight of decades in the silence. "He asked me, long ago, to say nothing. He believed his sacrifice was protecting more than just a name. Jobs, families, the city's future. He chose to take the fall so they wouldn't lose everything." Natalie's breath hitched, her hands trembling lightly. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken history. Caprio's eyes softened, yet held an unyielding resolve. "And now, I'm watching you make the same mistake, believing that fighting the law will heal what's broken. But sometimes, nobility isn't about battling a system. It's about knowing when to step back." Her mouth parted, struggling to form a protest, but the words caught and crumbled in her throat. He continued, "Because of all this, for everything, you will have your ticket waived. The case is dismissed. But it comes with one condition." Natalie's heart stalled. He leaned forward, voice dropping just enough to fill the courtroom's stillness. "You will read your father's letter aloud, completely, before this courtroom. No edits, no excusing." Panic blinked behind her eyes. Her fingers clenched the worn paper as if it could shield her from the weight of that demand. I don't think I can," she admitted, voice barely a whisper. "This is private. It's personal." Caprio's gaze was steady, unyielding. Not a judge ordering, but a man asking, expecting something far beyond the surface of law or precedent. "You must, for those who sit in this room, for yourself." The courtroom inhaled as she unfolded the letter, each crease groaning softly in the silence. Her voice was fragile at first, so quiet that a few whispered breaths fluttered like disturbed feathers. But as she spoke, the words slipped through her, raw and unguarded. "My dear Natalie," she read, "if you are holding this letter, then perhaps my choice was not enough to shield you from pain. I am sorry, not for what I did, but for what it cost you. For the daughter who bears the weight of a man trying to protect a city, who never thought the law would be the final judge of his legacy. Her voice wavered. Tears leaked before she could hush them. The words grew harder to say, not merely confession, but a plea. I took the blame to keep others safe. I was wrong to think silence was strength, when it was only a chain. You must build your own truth in a world that will not always understand. The letter folded slowly, revealed the deep fissures beneath the public face her father once bore. Apologies tangled with pride and regret, a man looking past the law to the cost borne quietly by those left behind. The courtroom was breathless. Even the quietest cough seemed loud in the heavy air. Natalie's lips stilled, the last syllable lingering long before she faltered. Her eyes, wet and wide, met Caprio's steady gaze, silent acknowledgement passing between them. He gave a slight nod, the faintest tension in his shoulders easing. But redemption did not arrive in applause or relief. Instead, a complex stillness settled, reverberating with the cruel mercy of truths spoken aloud, but not erased. Justice, that day, felt less like a verdict and more like a reckoning, a shadow cast across old wounds brought faintly into the light. The courtroom waited, caught between the pain of what had been and the fragile hope of what might still be. As the last words slipped from Natalie's trembling lips, silence settled like a weight across the courtroom. The hush wasn't soft or tentative, but thick, dense, everyone holding their breath, unsure what would come next. Natalie's hands rested lightly on the letter, now folded and worn where her grip had tightened and loosened. Her chest heaved in a silent rhythm of relief and dread, waiting for the inevitable judgment, the final blow, or perhaps mercy. Then, from the back row, an unexpected voice broke the stillness. It was soft at first, hesitant. An elderly man rose, his frame stooped slightly, but his eyes sharp and steady as they locked onto the judge's bench. "Your Honor," he began, his voice cracked but resolute, "I need to speak." The courtroom shifted in unison, heads turning, whispers rippling like a breeze through dry leaves. Natalie's heart lurched when she recognized the man. It was George Mallory, one of her father's longtime aides, a figure discreet and loyal, hardly ever seen since the scandal shattered their lives. "I was there," he said, voice quieter now but no less burdened. "I'm the one who altered the procurement records, not your father. He had nothing to do with what happened." His gaze swept toward Natalie, fatigue and regret etching deep lines into his face. Natalie stared, disbelief crashing over her like a sudden tide. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The truth she'd longed for, the defense she'd imagined, shattered in a single sentence. For one heartbeat, the room held its breath again. Judge Caprio remained silent, no gesture, no interruption. The man continued, voice unsteady but gaining courage. "I heard this case was on today's docket. Couldn't stay away. I needed to come forward, to tell you all. The truth that could finally set things right." Whispers swelled around the courtroom, yet the judge's calm presence held the moment in balance. Caprio leaned forward slightly, the familiar crease between his brows deepened with quiet concern. "Mr. Mallory," the judge said softly but firmly, "thank you for your honesty. We will suspend proceedings momentarily." He tapped his gavel gently, then motioned for the courtroom to adjourn briefly. "Please wait outside. I need a word with you in chambers." The courtroom emptied in a measured urgency, footsteps echoing long and thin down the marble halls. Natalie's legs felt weak, her mind a storm of confusion and dawning resolve. She stayed rooted, breath shallow, then moved toward the chamber's hallway, heart pounding with a purpose that no longer felt like accusation, but necessity. Huddled against the corridor wall beyond a slightly ajar door, she strained to catch the fragments of a low conversation, a quiet exchange between Caprio and Mallory. "Yes," Mallory said, voice weighted. "The original documents are still intact, filed away in that warehouse on Bridge Street, the one scheduled for demolition in less than 48 hours. I tried to preserve them, but no one was listening." Caprio's voice followed, measured and grave. "If those papers prove innocence, they could reopen his case. But I'm torn. The truth alone doesn't guarantee peace. It must lead somewhere better." Natalie's pulse surged, lightning sharp and consuming. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. She pushed off the wall, footsteps quickened, and without hesitation, she stepped into the hall. Her mind spun with a new clarity, fueled by a quiet fire that forced her forward. The rain outside had begun again, steady and cold, but it didn't slow her. If anything, it sharpened her purpose. As she hurried toward the courthouse exit, the weight of years of silence, falsehood, and grief pressed lightly on her shoulders. What awaited in that old warehouse wasn't just paper or proof. It was a chance to reclaim the dignity stolen from her family. Caprio watched her leave through the window, the faintest crease of conflict softening his features. He understood the path she chose, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. The truth's burden and its grace demanded courage to bear, and he neither hindered nor stopped her now. Outside, the night swallowed her figure in rain and shadow, but her eyes shone with the unyielding light of conviction. The chase was on, not for vengeance or bitterness, but for a justice forged in honesty, raw and stubborn as the city's stones. And somewhere deep inside, the judge quietly hoped, for her, for them all, that this time it might be enough. Night had settled over Providence, the rain tapping a steady, mournful rhythm on the cracked pavement outside the warehouse district. Each drop splashed into puddles, rippling under the yellow glow of a lone street lamp. Natalie's breath hung in the cold air as she eased the padlock off the heavy, rusted door. The metal groaned, protesting against years of neglect, before swinging open to reveal the stale, damp darkness within. Her heart pounded. The warehouse smelled faintly of mildew and oil, heavy with the scent of forgotten memories. A single beam from her flashlight cut through the gloom, illuminating battered crates and scattered debris. At the far end, beneath a flickering bulb, rested an old metal filing cabinet. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside lay stacks of documents, their edges yellowed, papers brittle. Minutes passed as Natalie carefully gathered the files, the invoices, the detailed handwritten notes, proof that could finally clear her father's stained name. But just as she began to slip the papers into her bag, a voice spoke softly from the shadows. "You came." Startled, Natalie spun. Judge Caprio stepped forward, calm and composed, an unexpected presence that still somehow carried the weight of authority. His face was grave, eyes reflecting the cold drizzle outside like a mirror. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice low. "I called the archives to hold off demolition for another night. Figured this place might hold what you were after." She stared at him, the folder heavy in her hands. "Why are you here?" "The truth has a way of pulling people in," he replied, motioning toward the documents. "You found what's real." There was a long pause. Rain tapped insistently on the warehouse's tin roof. Natalie's fingers felt clammy as she handed him the folder. He opened it, running a finger over a page filled with neat script and official stamps. Invoices, notes, everything that should have been seen, he muttered. This clears your father, no doubt. A single shaft of light flickered overhead, casting their faces into sharp relief. Natalie swallowed hard, tension twisting inside her chest. So why not get it reopened? Why keep this buried? Caprio looked up, his expression unreadable. Because sometimes, he said quietly, the truth only matters if it changes us, not to punish old wounds or rewrite history, but to teach mercy where revenge might otherwise take root. The words hung in the air, weighty and deliberate. Natalie's gaze burned with frustration, pain barely restrained. That's cowardice, her voice cracked. You're protecting a broken system. My father deserves more than silence, more than this quiet acceptance. He regarded her with a patience honed by decades spent weighing justice. Maybe, but sometimes, he said gently, redemption isn't a verdict handed down in a courtroom. Sometimes redemption is a choice made quietly between ourselves and the past we carry. Tears blurred Natalie's vision. The anger and grief she'd clung to now felt sudden and fragile, unraveling swiftly beneath the judge's calm. Her hands trembled. She sat on a nearby crate, the folder slipping onto her lap. Maybe I've been chasing a ghost, she whispered, voice barely audible over the rain's soft hymn. Caprio stepped closer, placing a steady hand on her shoulder, not as a judge, but as a man who understood loss too well. The warehouse seemed to breathe around them, shadows of the past dissolving in the night's quiet grace. For a long moment, nothing was said. Outside, the rain softened, falling like a benediction over two souls finding unexpected peace amid the ruins of doubt and regret. The next morning, the courtroom felt different, lighter somehow, though the wood and stone wore the same familiar shadows. Judge Caprio sat behind his bench, the lines in his face softened by the early sunlight filtering through the tall windows. Natalie stood before him once again, the weight she had carried beginning to shift, though her shoulders still bore the strain of the mornings before. Her voice was quiet, more honest now, without the steel or pride that had filled it the day before. I tore up the papers, she said simply, eyes meeting the judge's with a careful openness. The exonerating documents, the ones that could have reopened everything, I destroyed them last night. A faint smile tugged at Caprio's lips. It was not amusement, but a recognition of something earned and understood. He nodded slowly, inviting her to say more, as if the very act of confession was part of the healing. Why? He asked softly. Her hands clenched briefly at her sides before relaxing. Because the truth was never just in those papers. It was in finding out who he really was, and in finding out who I am now because of him. The need to clear his name. I thought it would give me peace, but it didn't. It just kept me tied to a story I wasn't meant to finish. Silence spread through the courtroom, thick and reverent. Even the usual murmurs and rustling seemed swallowed by the gravity of those words. Caprio leaned forward, the slow creak of his chair marking the moment. Your father asked me to remind you, he began, voice steady and deliberate, that justice begins where pride ends. The room seemed to hold its breath at the simple truth of that sentence. Not a reprimand, no sentencing of fault, but a quiet, unshakable wisdom that settled among them all. The clerk's pencil paused mid-scribble. Even the faint ticking of the wall clock softened, as if time leaned in to listen. Natalie blinked, absorbing the weight of those words. They were nothing like she expected. No grand proclamation, no fiery vindication. Just an invitation to release the burden she'd carried for so long. Without conscious thought, the audience in the courtroom started to applaud, slowly, deliberately, each hand cupping the next in a gesture of respect, not spectacle. The sound was muted, but genuine, rising from shared understanding rather than celebration. The applause was almost a hush, a collective acknowledgement of journeys ended and quiet truths embraced. Natalie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her body, stiff from years of unresolved grief and anger, seemed to melt subtly, like frost surrendering to morning light. The heaviness that had clung to her finally began to dissolve, swept away not by law or judgment, but by something deeper: acceptance, maybe even grace. She turned and walked down the courtroom steps, the hum of the city rising again beyond the doors. Outside, the sky broke open with sunlight, pale gold pouring through the chill air. People moved with the ordinary rhythm of their lives, commuters heading to work, an elderly couple strolling arm in arm, a child's laughter catching in the breeze. For the first time in years, the shadow surrounding her father's name felt distant, like a story finally laid to rest. The street she stepped onto was just a street. The light wasn't judgmental or harsh. It was simple and true. Natalie's pace slowed, and she let herself feel the freedom in that small revelation: how justice once sought had quietly transformed into peace found. Her shoulders relaxed, and she walked on, no longer bound but free, moving forward into the day with steady, calm steps.